Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Faculty in Focus, the webinar. This is a digital version of a lecture series we've had for the last several years, where we feature a member of the Brown faculty to talk about their work, the state of their field, and what's generally on their mind. The response has been very strong among faculty and staff, and now we're opening the digital version more broadly to the public. I'm so pleased today to feature Associate Professor of Religious Studies, Andre Willis, as our first guest in the webinar series. Andre will talk to us about a very timely topic, coronavirus and the crisis of hope. And he has agreed to take a few audience questions. So please use your Q&A feature to submit questions, and we will get through them, as many of them as we possibly can. In the face of this global pandemic, as we have relocated students from campus and transitioned both our instruction and telecommuting for most of our employees, we knew that what we wanted to do is continue offering events and programming to help us unite as a community. And programs like this are designed to challenge our thinking, expand our understanding of pressing issues, and hopefully bring us together through a shared experience. And something that is profoundly important right now in the face of this public health crisis is our sense of hope, of faith, and what it means to be human. The threats and consequences of the novel coronavirus are widespread and range from disruptions of daily life and economic loss to illness and death. It is understandably challenging for many during this period to grapple with the weight of all of this and to consider what the future may hold. And there is no better person to help us contemplate these and other fundamental questions, including the role of religion, spirituality, and hope in the face of despair, than Professor Andre Willis. Andre came to Brown from Yale Divinity School, first as a visiting professor in 2012, and then joined the faculty full-time in 2014. He is a philosopher of religion whose work focuses on enlightenment, African-American religious thought, critical theory, and democratic citizenship as it relates to religious notions of hope, recognition, and belonging. A scholar of John Hume, Andre is the author of Towards a Humean True Religion, which was published in 2015, and he's currently working on a manuscript about African-American religion and politics called Afrotheism and Post-Democracy. He's published numerous articles and book chapters in leading journals and edited volumes. He's an accomplished and widely sought-after teacher. He is a friend and an advisor and has guided me over the years in very, very important ways. And he's an incredible asset to the Brown community. We're so happy to have Andre with us. And please join me in welcoming Andre Willis. Thank you, Andre, for agreeing to speak to us today.
Thank you, Professor Provost Locke. I appreciate the warm introduction. It's good to see you. I wish we all could be together, and I wish the circumstances were really different, but here we are. So I'll jump right in. When I think about catastrophic events over the last 20 years, my memories are split. I recall strangers sacrificing their lives to rescue people caught in the rubble of the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001, as well as the vicious anti-Muslim hatred that surged on September 12th. I recollect historic levels of donations pouring in to help rebuild Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria in 2017, as well as the bribery by federal officials in charge of rebuilding. And I remember epic stories of the life-saving efforts during Hurricane Katrina, as well as the police murders of unarmed citizens on Danziger Bridge. It seems that catastrophes bring out the best in us as well as our worst. Maybe it's that catastrophe affirms in dramatic and highly visible ways what we might already know deep down, that human beings are ever capable of producing beauty and terror. Now, this leads me to wonder, in light of the current catastrophe, qualitatively different from those previously mentioned, how might we tip the balance this time in favor of the better angels of our nature? Of course, we will never be perfect, for we cannot escape our limits as humans. But if facing this coronavirus has taught us anything, I hope it has etched in our souls the statement made by Martin Luther King Jr. in the April 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. How do we actualize King Jr.'s powerful insight from April 1963? How do we draw on this moment of uncertainty and pain and use it for good? Well, I believe we can begin to do so by generating an action-motivating hope as a counter to the current intensification of despair that COVID-19 has brought. In a time where millions more citizens no longer have food and/or housing security, we have to mobilize to ensure that every person can have 3 square meals a day and a roof over their head. In a time when health coverage literally means life and death more than ever before, we have to organize so that every American can get access to adequate health coverage. Let us use this moment of crisis to transform society so that it might meet the needs of all of its citizens. And may we begin this work by addressing the crisis of hope. Now, in its broadest sense, I find that the concept of hope is a hard thing to get one's head around. I've yet to come up with a satisfying definition for hope. For me, it's similar to other powerful symbols created by the human imagination. Words like God and love. These weighty terms have meant so much to so many people over such a long time that trying to define them does disservice to their power and richness. Still, I think we can say a lot about hope. We can describe how people relate to it. We can give some provisional meaning to it. And we can talk about hope in robust and interesting ways that can help us navigate the world. So along these lines, my thoughts about hope are shaped by 2 general ways the term is used. The first is a particular mode of speech that uses the word hope to refer to probable and future aims for an object that is good. Expressions of this type generally take the form of hope that X, hope for Y, and hope to Z. Basic examples of this in sentence form are, I hope to travel to Paris. I hope for a successful speech. Or, I hope this Zoom meeting ends soon. These kinds of hopes aim for future probable and good objects. They help organize and order human experience in useful ways. But the kind of hope I'm a bit more interested in does not aim for a future object. I call it deep hope. It is a generous, present disposition towards the future. I like to think of it as more of a tone or an energy. It is an outgrowth of despair, not its enemy. Martin Luther King describes something similar to this as grounded in the fact that he said, quote, always our reach exceeds our grasp. Now, I realize it may strike some of you as odd to think of hope as depending on despair. Most of us tend to think of fear and despair as the opposites of hope. But deep hope does not aim for a future probable good. It neither ends despair nor overcomes it. Rather, it is the state of being present to it. Allow me to rely on a work of art to try to clarify this idea. A now famous allegorical painting called Hope by the British artist George Frederick Watts evocatively shows a contorted, blindfolded, and barefoot girl atop a sphere playing a lyre with just one string. In that same sermon mentioned above, King Jr. described the work as, quote, depicting hope as seated atop our planet, but her head is sadly bowed and her fingers plucking one unbroken harp string, end quote. King Jr. here describes a hope that is always partially disappointed. He speaks of the agony of blasted hopes and broken dreams. But his aim was to remind his church folk of the limitations of the human condition. So he made sure he was unhesitatingly candid about the losses we inevitably face, and that he was sincere in the admonition that we, quote, accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope, end quote. He wanted his parishioners to be prepared to fight for freedom in the midst of disappointment and sorrow. Similarly, my thoughts about deep hope rely on the notion that this hope has an inverse relationship with despair. That is to say, if the disposition for hope increases, then the disposition for despair decreases. We often assume that an exponential increase in hope is desirable, but too much hope, as you know, is romantic and renders one incapable of meaningfully grappling with suffering and discomfort, consistent features of human life. So if we can keep hope and despair in a kind of balanced tension and an equilibrium, our capacity for motivation will increase and our purpose will become clearer. The task is to be able to rest in the nature of the way things are. Despair is part and parcel of the human condition and an inescapable element of hope. A wholehearted recognition of this is the first step, I want to argue, toward drawing on this current moment of sadness and doing something good with it. But none of us can tread this path alone. I mean, even in Hans Christian Andersen's tale, a child may have uttered it first, but it took some group solidarity for the whole town to cry out that the emperor didn't have anything on. My point is that this next phase is going to require strong self-confidence as well as belief in one another. The future will, to a significant extent, even if not fully, be what our collective actions determine it to be. But if deep hope is in crisis because of the intensification of despair, we need a strategy and some resources to help us rebalance. So in the remaining time, I want to focus on two practices that can help reset the stasis and rebalance the tension between deep hope and despair. And these practices are gratitude and fortitude. Since, however, the approach I want to argue for ultimately emphasizes a community sense of togetherness, what I'm really after is a shared gratitude and a collective fortitude. Towards the first one, shared gratitude, which I think of as a general appreciation for each other as mutual stewards of society, let me begin with my own offering. I'm thankful for this virtual coming together, and I want to express my appreciation for all of you who are here and all of you who made this happen. I've come to believe that no matter how much and where humans gather, they generally do so on a wish, something more fragile than a hope. And when we come together during a time of great sorrow, even virtually, that wish may simply be to have a moment of relief or to share our burdens or to lighten our load. This is a novel time, no question. And although gratitude is always accessible, it's really difficult to muster this sense of emotional prosperity in the face of paralyzing fears and devastating losses from this COVID-19. I want to stress that my emphasis on gratitude does not imply that things are okay. They are, in fact, not okay, and they may get worse before they get better. It's important that we don't sugarcoat this. But I want to say that still, in the midst of this horror and tremendous pain, it's important to remind ourselves of the things that can help us find some serenity and some balance. For even in our most stressful moments, we can benefit from slowing down our minds enough to connect with our hearts. This kind of outward-looking introspection can bring good things into our field of view. It can also help us collectivize gratitude as a means of resetting the equilibrium, I want to argue, is going on between hope and despair. Now, one of the good things that the emphasis on gratitude brings into focus is that even in the face of heartache, we've actually shown up for ourselves and we've been strong for others. We've handled more than we imagined we ever could, and we learned more than we thought we would, especially the difference between a virtual virus and a real one. Now, we may have brought a neighbor some groceries, given away masks to acquaintances, or shared some hand sanitizer with a stranger. We may have patiently inquired into the well-being of our friends, or somehow found extra patience just when they needed it. My point is that we've shown up for each other recently, and we've shown up for ourselves. And right now, at a time when it's really hard to be a human being, why don't we show ourselves some loving appreciation and then extend that energy of gratitude to others? But there's an aspect of shared gratitude that isn't simple. A general appreciation of each other as mutual stewards of our society is not easy to come by. It takes a different kind of listening and a change in the way we share our suffering. We might think of this as a generative listening, and we might consider the kind of sharing I'm describing as honest testimony. Or we can follow the late Bill Withers and simply think of it as a lean on me consciousness or a lovely day sensibility. It goes on in recovery programs and support groups around the globe every day. Ella Baker's work as a political organizer and democratic strategist in the civil rights movement is instructive for our thinking about this shared gratitude that I'm after. I think of Ella Baker, who you see here, as an exemplar of the kind of work that aimed to develop a general appreciation for each other as mutual stewards of society at the level of the grassroots. Baker prioritized working face to face with everyday people, not for them, but with them. And her methods comport with the kind of generative listening and honest testimony that I highlight as steps towards political organizing. At its best, honest testimony, that is, personal narrative that is emotionally forthright, yet not aggressive to its listeners. It's important, not aggressive to its listeners. It can be angry or full of rage, but not aggressive to its listeners. It can strengthen our sense of connection to one another when it affirms our interconnectedness through our differences. As you all know, the current impulse to project a kind of superficial sense of togetherness is strong, but it must be resisted. Lately, we've all heard this mantra going around. We're all in this together. And it's true, all of us do face a global pandemic. Yet, each of us will experience this pandemic differently. Some of us have registered losses that are too great to measure. Others have merely been inconvenienced. Keeping track of the pandemic's different effects strengthens our capacity for shared gratitude. Not because it invites a selfish thankfulness for what we have, but because it signals our investment in being responsible to fellow stewards of our society who happen to be in different social locations. There's a lot at stake in how we choose to move forward from here. Will we honor those who will not come out on the other side of this great spring? By seizing on these unprecedented conditions to forge a future where everybody matters equally? Shared gratitude that can restore this balanced tension, this equilibrium between hope and despair can help us do so. But gratitude without fortitude stagnates. So we got to find that fortitude, that is, we got to find that courage in the face of pain. This fortitude forged in a communal mourning where we become a bridge over troubled water for our neighbor will pair with shared gratitude to nurture deep hope. Now, as a way into my description of this collective fortitude that I'm after, I want to give a personal narrative just briefly. After my first year of college, I returned from New England to my hometown in Northeast Ohio for the summer. I had concocted a plan along with my best friend TJ, who was attending college in the South. The plan was that we would go back home, make some money, find some summer jobs, and spend some time hanging out together that summer. We accepted positions working for the city's engineering department on a team of summer interns tasked with inspecting the town's storm sewer system. That is, the arrangement of drains and pipes that carries stormwater runoff from curbs to local water bodies. The engineer described to us how an effective storm sewer system keeps roads and towns from flooding. He then assigned us with 2 others to correctly remap and accurately rediagram every catch basin and pipe in the system. We drove a big truck around town with old maps looking for the storm drains, and after checking the accuracy of the map when finding the catch basin, we would take off the grate, visually assess the condition of the basin and the grate, and record data. Was this a stable catch basin structure? Which direction was the water flowing? Were there any blockages? What kind of grate was it? The data we submitted was used to chart the effectiveness of our city's storm sewer system if it were to face a 5-year storm event or up to a 100-year storm event. I learned that there were complicated mathematical projections for assessing the capacity of our system over time based on projections of rainfall and the likelihood of a certain amount of runoff. I thought of the 100-year storm event as the huge storm that would only happen once out of every 100 years. I learned that it is better to think of it as a storm that has a 1% probability of occurring in any given year. It turns out that after all the data was in, it was clear and obvious that our town storm system was inadequate for handling a 100-year storm event. Worse than that, there was literally nothing our town could do, even if we rebuilt every aspect of our system to its highest levels. That would allow our system to handle the kind of duress that the 100-year storm would bring. So what I'm saying is that 100-year storm, I realized, would forever change our town and maybe even wash it away. Now, when I first heard this, it felt like a sobering fact, right? Of course, I had accepted death as a reality, uncertainty as a guarantee, and the uncontrollable as certainty. But to have mathematical evidence that my whole town could be wiped out was difficult to swallow. I wondered what would become of my town if that 100-year storm were to occur. How would those who survived be different? What would they collectively commit to doing? What songs would they sing? I have the same question for those who will be lucky enough to remain after this virus subsides. How will they, quote, return to the strange idea of continuous living despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty, as you see poet Ada Limon phrasing it in her 2017 poem, Instructions on Not Giving Up. Her words about the arrival of new leaves get at the mystery and fragility of what is to come. They also suggest a natural kind of fortitude, for nature just keeps going. I think that one tear at a time, possibly missing a piece of their hearts, the scarred and wounded will reappear soon to carry the story forward. They will, with masks and gloves, begin again to practice a particular form of loyalty that American philosopher Josiah Royce called community. Projecting from Royce, this form of loyalty can generate resilience, an important protective factor against stress, and produce consilience, a defense against bad thinking. Both of these quietly serve the development of a collective fortitude, one of the pillars that rebalances hope with despair. Against certain forms of community that produce a naive collectivity, political theorist Robert Esposito argues in his 2013 text, Terms of the Political, that, quote, community is both necessary and impossible, end quote, which I take to mean that by default, humans exist in community, yet community can never be fully realized. His takeaway is that when it comes to community, our reach is always beyond our grasp. Esposito contends that this is one of the ways violence inheres in community. He says, the harm is in the, quote, incapacity of the community to preserve the life of its members, end quote. In this way, he links immunity to community and focuses on the root of each term, the Latin munus or munia, that is often taken to mean a duty or a gift, that is, a gift given, not received. See, the gift that the community provides is the gift of protection for its members, that is, the gift of immunity. Now, Esposito's insights are not directly addressed to a 100-year storm or to a coronavirus pandemic, but I find them suggestive. They lead me to think about maybe survivors of the pandemic we're now facing will reappear with two sadnesses. The first is for those who have just died. This may be a kind of guilt. The second is from having witnessed so clearly the visible results of our past inaction. This is a kind of shame. We knew that in the US, poor health was largely a proxy for race, class, and immigration status. We knew the history of systematic racism that exposed people of color to toxic pollution. We knew the power of corporate advertising campaigns in poor neighborhoods. We knew of the food deserts. We knew of the sugary diets in public schools, and we knew of the difficult access to health care in the overcrowded prisons. But we did more to avoid seeing these things than we did to change them. So I think it's fair to say, and I join the chorus of scholars who've already made this point better than I can, that catastrophic conditions existed prior to the spread of this coronavirus. Now, this observation is not meant to depress you. It is meant to impress upon you that we've got to make positive change. We're coming through the most deeply challenging period of history in our lifetimes. That means we as a community are being forged in the fire. And we are learning, as Esposito may suggest, that it is our job to protect the members of our community. But we are also learning against Esposito that immunity is not a zero-sum game, for it is the very inability to protect everyone all the time that fuels the collective fortitude and teaches us to just keep going and be better. Communities are never perfect, but they can shape habits, mold institutions, and craft ideas in the ways that affirm that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, end quote. If this great spring has not given us the fortitude to transform life as we knew it, then nothing will. For when the dust settles and the smoke clears, we will be facing new possibilities for freedom and justice that will require a stronger sense of togetherness than we've ever known. Affirming this fundamental connectedness will require a deeper hope than we've ever known. But that hope has to be built from shared gratitude and strengthened by the collective fortitude that I've tried to lay out here. This hope is foundational for commitment, for when hope is in equilibrium with despair, we can once again become a community of self-surprising creatures. This virus is, and I think it is, and I'll close here, the last best hope during my lifetime to inspire a fundamental transformation of our society. And we've already seen an explosion of creative efforts to address the problem this pandemic has exposed. So let us stand with each other and get to it. Bring out the best of yourself and each other. May your hope be contagious and your love be infectious. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. That was really terrific. Your talk was amazingly inspiring, insightful. Really, I mean, I've been thinking so much listening to you. And I'm sure that your messages of shared gratitude, collective fortitude resonated with many in the audience. But can I ask you a slightly personal question, which is, how do you stay hopeful during this period of uncertainty, sadness, and crisis?
Well, I mean, it's a struggle for all of us. So thank you for the question. It's a struggle for all of us, but I think fundamentally for me, the type of cat I am is really affirming the connections I have with other people, and remaining disciplined to my schedule. That is showing up for myself and staying close with, my loved ones, those in my inner circle, in the inside of my emotional envelope, as it were. I tend to stay away from things like the news and a lot of television and stuff, because I find that a lot of the messages there tend to affirm the kind of we'll call it superficial hopes and the kind of optimism that tend not to support my spirit. But it's a struggle right now because of the isolation and the quarantine. I'm lucky to be able to come into contact still with, my friends and family and stuff, but at least some of them at a distance. But I don't take this idea of social distance as a good one. I think it's more about physical distance now, and I'm able to experience social closeness. So good contacts on the phone, and able to just kind of do things that affirm parts of myself that I know are most fragile right now, right? A lot of that comes from the students as well. We have sorry to run on here, but we have a wonderful class of students in both of my classes, but one of the classes is 96 students. And even though we're in different parts of the world right now, every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30, we have 99% attendance. Everybody's showing up, and the important thing is just seeing each other. So that's just one of the ways I'm able to sustain also. It's been really supportive for me.
No, that's great. Thanks. You're also a professor of religious studies, and I wonder if you want to share with us, are there any spiritual or religious practices that you look to right now for hope or inspiration?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Well, when we think of certain practices or micro practices, it's ways in which we're talking about how is the religious heritage that I come out of in my bones, right? And I think part of that is through certain daily practices that I just take for granted, things like prayer, meditation, and extension of kindness and compassion, right? So being compassionate is, I think, a practice that tends to easily link with the religious tradition I come out of, which is a prophetic Black Baptist Christian tradition. And then, of course, there are ways that communities are being generated, that is through church services on the internet, through recovery groups that are going on through Zoom, and spaces where you can practice yoga and meditation with inside of communities, even though they're all virtual. So I've pretty much kept the same schedule, and that has, I guess, my way of pulling in my own or sustaining my own religious practice in the face of this moment.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question, and then we can open it up for the audience.
Okay.
there's a tendency for so many of us right now to want things to go back to normal, before the pandemic. As soon as we're allowed to get together again, let's just go back to normal. But I hear you warning against that. And instead, what I heard you say is asking us to see this as a moment of opportunity for creating a more just society, an opportunity to break with the past, to break with how things were. And I hope you're right. And I think it's very much needed. Do you think that we will now be able to see the unseen in our communities and not just spend, as you said, spend so much time trying to avoid seeing it as opposed to doing something about it? And how can we lift up the unseen and change the story about what the vulnerable and especially underpaid workers on whom we depend? How can we show that we're all truly mutually dependent?
Mm. No, that's a nice point. Nice question. So, I think a couple of things that have haunted me lately is the voice of various folks on the margin who were trying to get our attention and did in some ways, but weren't able to somehow captivate more action. One of the voices I keep hearing, man, is Eric Garner saying, "I can't breathe." When I hear about all these people dying from respiratory problems and being intubated, I hear that voice, like that almost kind of prophetic expression, like "I can't breathe," which I know a lot of people, unfortunately, have been saying before, they expire, as he did. I hear other voices, like, we talk so much about people right now who we're not noticing. So the rhetoric of, Me Too comes to mind. Again, a movement that was kind of on the margins, but when you think about their grammar, Me Too, the international movement for Black lives, right? All about mattering, that we kind of didn't center, but that language is so important. And right now it's kind of forced itself back on to the agenda. That is, we can't ignore it. We can't ignore the question of who matters. We can't ignore the question of who can't breathe. And it's us too, right? All of us. So, and I'm also taken back to the language of Occupy Wall Street, right? Another movement. Again, it got a lot of attention, but it's still on the margin in terms of what kind of actions we were willing to do to materialize the aims of that movement. So my sense is that the grammar, the lexicon, the kinds of ways folks were talking from the margins has now moved to the center. So it's about actualizing then the rhetoric and materializing the concepts that have been, people have been screaming about from the fringes for a while. So I think it is much more seen now, much more visible. And it's just a matter of a kind of collective will. And that will is hard to generate when we're exhausted and there are no sources of hope. That was my point here with the intensification of despair. Really, really hard to generate that. But there's something about togetherness, and I have to fall back on that because that is, my spiritual heritage is about a certain kind of togetherness. I come from a people who answered the question of what to do with catastrophe very clearly. Try your hardest to turn it into something good, something useful, something that can sustain your people beyond that catastrophe and the various catastrophes that you're about to get hit with. So, yeah, I think it is the case that these things are becoming more visible, and I just hope we can mobilize and materialize on top of it now. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Andre. Marissa, do we have questions from the audience?
Yes, we have a lot of questions. I don't know that we'll get to all of them, and we have a lot of thanks and indication this has been very inspiring for many in the audience. So thank you, Andre. Related to what you just said, one audience member is asking, so I'm a very hopeful person. I'm optimistic, see the glass half full. I have friends that are asking for prayer because of loved ones affected by COVID-19. This has proven to be a roller coaster ride that weighs heavy on me. How can I not get down and continue to have joy and be helpful to others?
Woo, man. You know, there's a lot there. I don't know that questioner's personal circumstances, but you know, for me, it always begins with a reach outward, right? That is a kind of cry for help, as it were, if the loneliness and solitude and melancholy is just getting so overwhelming. So I guess the question is, what kind of resources do you have that may be nearby that you might not be seeing right now because you're in the fog of despair? You see, what kind of access can you get to, you know, energies that can elevate in the face of, you know, this cloudiness? But it will pass. Remember, you know, no feeling is final. So that's something to keep in mind also. You know, I would have to know a little bit more about that person. So, you know, tell them to write me an email or something.
Okay. Here's another. How do you personally distinguish the difference between superficial hope from true hope?
Oh, yeah, I appreciate that. So, you know, again, I feel like superficial hope is the kind of optimism that gets trumpeted around in mostly corporate and political spaces. So I think Obama, who kind of, you know, Obama, so he said that painting that I showed in the slide was his favorite painting, and he took from Jeremiah Wright this idea on the audacity to hope. Jeremiah Wright had preached a sermon, Audacity for Hope, in the church that Obama attended, Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. So Jeremiah Wright sees the painting, hears a King's sermon, and there are a few other sermons in our tradition that talk about this painting. And Jeremiah Wright talked about an audacity for hope. Obama uses that, titles his book, uses hope as his campaign mantra, calls it an audacity to hope, right? But you see, that hope is always linked to acquiring certain ends and certain goals. That is, it's more like the future probable object that he's after, you know. So it's almost a kind of a capitalist desire and an optimism that you can kind of float. It's easy, it's not attached to despair. So the superficial hopes flow like that. I'm after a hope that's much deeper and is linked to despair in fundamental ways. That's the same way that grace is linked to sin. You see, once you separate those, that's when you get a cheapened or a superficial hope or grace. Mm-hmm.
So following up on that, someone else says, assuming this version of hope you share is inspired by religious studies or religion, is it possible to derive that hope from a non-religious starting point or from a scientific perspective, perhaps?
No, indeed. I was actually careful to not necessarily link it to what we might think of as conventionally religious worldviews. That is to say, you know, I saw myself as articulating what could be easily categorized as a kind of, you know, a secular version of hope, right? Because it's really about hope in each other. It's about hope in our capacities to connect more deeply and to work in ways more together so that we can change this thing. So I think it is adaptable, and I actually organized it in a way that it would be adaptable to what we might think of as a more secular or an audience that doesn't easily attach itself to, you know, the variety of, you know, things we think of when we think of religious traditions.
And again, something related. Thank you again for this wonderful talk. You've named difficult and important feelings. My question is about deep hope as a present disposition. Is this the kind of hope that's something we can choose? If so, can you describe the experience of this kind of agency? Presumably, it's not the same kind of choice as, say, choosing a flavor of ice cream.
Yeah, no, that's well put. So, I mean, I think there's always a kind of a blend, you know, right? There's a hard line. It's a very difficult line to determine when you're talking about something like hope as to what its sources are, right? There are no direct causes that can generate this kind of hope that I'm talking about. But the thing that I'm emphasizing today is its connections to despair. So remember the other question that we had where the person said, you know, they were kind of down and out and trying and sort of wavering. I mean, there are two options there. And these are choices, but they're not only personal choices. The option is give in to despair or give in to hope, right? And those are not simply decisions, those are ways of shaping one's being, right, in light of surrounding circumstances, habits, institutions, weather. I mean, so it's a complicated, right, affair, right, to think of this kind of hope simply as a choice, right? I would say, no, it's not a choice, but it is partially a choice, right? We have something to do with it, but not everything. And what I was talking about today was how community can help us make that choice. The main way in is always gratitude, appreciating yourself, affirming yourself, and then trying to extend the energy of gratitude outward. That will begin to strengthen this muscle for the kind of deep hope that I'm talking about.
Great. I have two more. There's many more, but there's two I'd like to get to before we conclude. One is people in our country are at odds right now about how to flatten the curve during the pandemic. Some advocate staying at home as long as possible. Others want to return to their regular jobs and social lives. How can those who disagree find shared hope and aspiration?
Well, that's important because I left out a whole segment about the pushback, right? So, I mean, think of the various divisions that are also rising right now between folks who want to be, liberated from quarantine, folks who have gotten small businesses, say, who have gotten, money from the government, but others that have been turned down. So you get some controversy there. Some folks are going to develop antibodies to this thing and others won't. Will that be a new form of discrimination, right? So this hope thing I'm talking about is an uphill battle, right? It's both not easy, but there are real forces that are going to push against it. There are forces of division are always strong. So I try to kind of attend to that when I talked about honest testimony, right? So if one moderates their personal narrative, right, such that its energy is not aggressive to its audience, right? So the testimony has to be a non-aggressive testimony to a listener. Then I think we can see each other and hear each other and understand each other better, because it's not important that we're not going to agree on the variety of issues, but we have to be heard, is my point. And how that hearing happens is with a different kind of testimony. Now, people are going to reject that and say, well, I don't need to, comport myself with this vision of how I should be talking. And that's fine. But we push back against that and say, well, without loving testimony, there's no way we can have a conversation. I can't hear you, right? So if you want me to hear you, speak with a little less hostility and aggression. You can bring some energy, and you can bring some energy of disagreement, but we can't work out this division. And some people won't be interested in working it out. And that's true. But the aim is always to get enough people together for enough time to make a big enough change. Everybody's not going to always be on your side.
Great advice. And the final one that I think is appropriate, because most, if not all, of the audience are Brown community. Question is, how can we in the Brown community be of greatest help to one another to breathe more deeply, given worries about completing their work and sustaining employment and family illness, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I see, so my students said their biggest worry is the uncertainty. And, that was striking to me. That actually changed what I said today. I asked them that yesterday, and they told me it was uncertainty, and that had an impact on, on my thinking. Because the point that was made in my class was the things we can control seem to be changing, right? So I mean, and I get that, and that that's real, and I can see why that would be troubling. But I think there are some constants, and those constants are important to rely on. So one of the constants I see from our community, our university, is the voice of the provost and the president, right? And our leading administrators trying to the best of their ability to be sources of certainty. That is, they're saying, we're here, the institution's solid, we're going to figure this out together and keep moving ahead. So there are ways in which the stability that responds to the uncertainty, right, comes from the consistency of, that what we know. And our buildings are standing, our people are working, we're having classes. So there's a kind of regularity to combat the uncertainty. But the other thing I think that's inspiring about what we're doing, both as an institution and as a kind of a structure in the city of Providence to help people there, is we're hosting doctors or medical personnel in our dormitories. Students are finding creative ways and entrepreneurial ways to create apps, and there's all kind of things going on in a variety of centers that are attending to the needs of the people right now. So it's about generating the creativity as a university community and relying on what we have, which is each other, to keep pressing ahead. Sorry, I went long on that.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much, Andre, for that really terrific, inspiring talk. I mean, your message of hope, your message of resilience, your message about what really matters in the community and the core values. I think that's such an important message these days. And while there is tremendous amount of uncertainty, I think your students are right. And this uncertainty is destabilizing for many of us, even those of us who pretend that it's not, but it is. I think that what I hear in your message, and what I think is so true, is that as long as we're guided by those core values now, and by those core values when we do eventually emerge from this crisis, we will be a stronger community. We will be a stronger institution, and maybe we will be able to make a difference so that the unseen are truly seen, and we can build a more just world. So thank you for that terrific talk, and thank you for bringing us together. And thanks everyone for participating in Faculty in Focus, the webinar. It's really wonderful to see you all. Take care. Goodbye.